Thanks. Good afternoon and good morning. Welcome to Alpha Sigma Nu's fall webinar on Lunch and Learn, the online pivot, Jesuit University, the life in the new reality. I'm Kate Gartner, Executive Director of Alpha Sigma Nu, and I want to thank our panelists and Amy O'Neill from our office for making this conversation possible. The webinar will be recorded. And we hope there will be time for questions from the audience at the end, toward the end of the hour. We remind our panelists to use your mute button when you're not speaking. I'll be asking the questions of the panelists in this order. First, the university presidents, then our advisors and faculty, and then the university presidents, and then circle back with the next question. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Joseph McShane of the Society of Jesus is president of Fordham University and has been president since 2003. From 1998 to 2003, he served as the president of University of Scranton. He received his bachelor's and master's degree from Boston College, a master's degree in theology from the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley, and his doctorate in the history of Christianity from the University of Chicago. Previous to his presidencies, he was on faculty in the Department of Religious Studies at Le Moyne College and dean of the Fordham College at Rose Hill. Timothy Law Snyder, PhD, is the president of Loyola Marymount University and is the 16th president there. He holds a BA in psychology and a BS and MS in mathematics from the University of Toledo. He earned his MA and PhD in applied and computational mathematics from Princeton University. Prior to LMU, President Snyder served as Vice President of Academic Affairs at Loyola University, Maryland, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Fairfield University, and Dean of Science at Georgetown University. He's been a distinguished educator, mathematician, and academic administrator at Jesuit institutions for almost 30 years. Our advisors. Paul Fontana, PhD, is our chapter advisor at Seattle University. He's been a chapter advisor since 2009. He earned his BS in physics and mathematics at Michigan State University and his MS and PhD at the University of Wisconsin. He's probably glad I have a little red on, huh, Paul? For Wisconsin. His research topics include experimental fluid dynamics, especially turbulence and two-dimensional systems. Deborah O'Connor, PhD, CPA, has been our chapter advisor at Holy Cross since 2017. She earned her BBA in accounting at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst and her MS in taxation at Bentley College. Dr. O'Connor earned her PhD in business administration at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She teaches a variety of courses, including financial accounting, operations research, federal income taxation, and cost accounting. Our chapter presidents. Brianna Reed is chapter co-president at Spring Hill College. Ms. Reed is a senior marketing and management major at Spring Hill. She holds presidential positions not just at Alpha Sigma Nu, but also at Sisters in Service, and serves as an RA, resident assistant and a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. After graduation, she plans to earn her MBA at Spring Hill. And she's originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. Allison Vermiglio is the chapter president for her second term at Rockhurst University. Ms. Vermiglio is studying psychology, English, global studies, and pre-MBA. In addition to serving as chapter president, she's also president of Voices for Justice, a social justice organization at Rockhurst. She's also an RA and a writing tutor. And after graduation, she plans a career in counseling. Allison is from St. Louis, Missouri. So I'd like to start with the university presidents. And I'll ask you both this question with perhaps Father McShane starting first. When you are thinking about this semester and next, what are your biggest concerns for students and faculty beyond the obvious concern for their health and the pandemic?
Well, it's an excellent question and one that I lose sleep over all the time, and I'm sure Tim does as well. You know, beyond the obvious health concern, I have to say the health concern is big. We want to make sure that faculty, staff, and students are all safe. and we have the proper protocols and procedures in place for testing and for screening to make sure that everyone is well and remains well. And that is something that I think every president has uppermost in her or his mind at this time. Beyond that, because of the changeover from mostly on-ground or exclusively on-ground learning to at least partially or majorly online learning, one of the major concerns that I and everybody here at Fordham has is our concern about whether or not in this new virtual mode of education, we're able to deliver on the Jesuit promise. And the Jesuit promise is one that all of our schools really can offer and do offer. And what is it? Well, we want to make sure that our students receive a world-class, rigorous education, but in a context in which they experience the cura personalis, which really gives heart and soul to each of the Jesuit colleges and universities, not only in this country, but throughout the world. Mm-hmm. How do you cherish and challenge students if you are living in and in learning in or teaching in a virtual mode, a distance mode? So this is a very, very big concern for me. Can we deliver on the promise of Jesuit education in the COVID moment in a virtual mode? I believe that all of our schools, from the largest to the smallest, no matter where they are located in the country, I think all of our schools and the faculties of our schools have wrestled with this and have really put themselves through their paces to make sure that the instruction that they give virtually is as compelling, as involving, and as transformative as it is or has always been in an on-ground setting. So I have that, that general concern for the faculty. Are we supporting them enough in the efforts that they're making to adjust their teaching style to this new format, this new reality? Do we give them the IT that they need? Do we give them the seminars that they need to learn new things? Do we create virtual meeting spaces for them so they can teach one another? For our students, the same is true. Do we give our students enough training in how to learn virtually, how to make the most out of virtual learning? But also, do we give, and I know Tim is going to follow up on this because we deal with this all the time, are we able to give students a close approximation of the full college experience that they expected? Rich in activity, rich in support, and rich in challenge. And that is something that we all worry about. And do we do this in a way which is safe? And here's a balancing act that we deal with. Enough freedom to do well, but enough restriction to stay safe. So those are the things that I worry about all the time. Everyone in my campus community worries about them as well. Faculty, staff, administrators in a special way as we continue to focus, as we always do, on students, their welfare, their progress, and their transformation. So I hand the conch back to you.
And I'll continue. Kate, thank you for the question. And Father McShane has covered so many of the bases. I think one key piece for us at LMU is something that I'm harping on constantly, and that is reflecting from our future into the present. We have to recognize continually that we must learn to be more creative. Our problems are more complex, they are more interdisciplinary, and they're going to require that we think in ways we never have imagined we could think. So in a certain way, the pandemic gives us an opportunity to rethink our business as usual. How do we learn? What is the meaning of our learning? How can we connect the wider world with what is going on in the classroom? So in addition to all the things that Father just walked us through, I have that sort of overlaying concept. A couple more things that are in the mix with this, of course. This is, I'm going to extend this, Kate, from pandemic to pandemic era, or the 2020 question. So we have so much more on the table. And there's the whole question, and these are made harder by virtue of the pandemic. How do we become a proactively anti-racist institution? How does that affect the society around us so we can take advantage of another extraordinary opportunity, and that is a nation in the process of waking up? How can we make that happen? At the same time, how can we instill and nourish courageous conversations among all members of at least our LMU family? And again, how can we impact the world in a way where we can land in a future in which, prior to a conversation with a given individual, you, I, others do not judge. We arrive at conversations prepared to melt, prepared to change a bit by virtue of those conversations, maybe even have a meltdown and reform ourselves in light of those conversations. This election has brought so many of those kinds of issues to the forefront. A divided society, much gleefully received, if not instigated, by foreign enemies, if you will, and certainly very much invigorated by certain media and members of the media, primetime cable news hosts, for example, who are making money directly off our division and deluding us, if not hijacking us, into positions against one another where we do not gain from what we share, and again, what we can create. So we're living in a sort of triplicate challenge of the pandemic, becoming proactively anti-racist, and learning again how we can converse and take advantage of the goodness of humankind. And with that, Christ's love and what we can do with it and what we can launch from it.
It's interesting, Dr. Snyder, you in your last comments, you almost summed up why we wanted to do this webinar. Is this, the current situation as a whole. And I'll definitely be following up with another in the second round of questions with the questions about racial justice and what all of this can do. But I'd like to continue with Dr. Fontana and Dr. O'Connor. What have been your experiences teaching this last semester and also last spring? What are your greatest challenges? And just like Fathers McShane and Dr. Snyder mentioned, how do you keep the Jesuit in virtual learning? Dr. Fontana, can we start with you?
Sure. So we had a very fast pivot, as a lot of places did. It was really a weekend between when the university, Seattle University, announced that we were going to online instruction, and they basically said on a Friday, everything's going online on Monday. I had a couple of days heads up because I had been making some inquiries with our IT people about ways that we could maybe move in that direction, because I kind of saw the handwriting on the wall, and was wondering if our content management software had vehicles for for doing group learning. And they said, well, you can use that if you want, but we kind of recommend this thing that we've been encouraging people to use called Zoom. And so I had that was probably the Tuesday before we shut down. And so I had a few days to kind of familiarize myself with it, and sent out instructions to my students over the weekend, what I figured we were going to do for the rest of that quarter. That was with a week to go in winter quarter. And then we had an extended spring break to kind of turn around and do some extra planning so that we could have spring quarter in the new format. I was teaching a lab course, so that had its own challenges. So I had to reinvent that course so that I was assuming students would be at home. They needed to get materials at home. I had to put together activities where they could basically build their own apparatus, and we had to get them equipment from the labs. And so I was running to people's houses and delivering things. And ended up having really successful time transforming that into a project where students were building their own Geiger counters and doing some experiments. Our lab manager in the physics department with the introductory laboratories was doing some heroic work, creating labs that people could do at home. But labs are kind of a separate issue. I find that with the other instruction, with courses that are sort of lecture and inquiry based, that sort of format, the thing that's really been the biggest challenge is, I think, the social interaction, the social component of learning. It's really underscored how fundamental that is to what we do. Over time, so at first it was, Zoom, I think people agree, has been kind of a mixed blessing. So Zoom was fantastic for, getting people connected and being able to provide a format, doing things like we're doing now. But of course, it has its own evils, just Zoom fatigue, and we're still kind of connecting from a distance. And so it's a very different thing than sitting in your office and having the door open and having people, running back and forth, and all of the day-to-day interactions that you're having with people, and just the atmosphere that you're in. Students being able to hang out together in the lounges and work on homework problems. So I think the biggest challenge has been trying to deliberately and intentionally maintain those social kind of aspects of learning that were sort of automatic when we were in rooms together. I'm a big believer in what happens, the magic that happens when people get in a room together, and now we can't do that. So I think that what's turning out to be the case is some of that is getting replaced. Some of that sort of informal, serendipitous interaction is getting replaced by conscious, scheduled Zoom meetings. So we're having department meetings more than we would have had, if we were not virtual. I'm meeting with students, on a regular schedule. Personally, I'm doing the same thing. I've got sort of regular Zoom calls scheduled with family members and friends, to kind of maintain social interactions. And so there's a sort of intentionality that's been forced on us to try to reproduce that. And it's not a perfect replacement, but it does have some advantages, like what we're doing now. I'm looking forward to connecting to people. Like, I had students that were out of the country, because of COVID. We've been able to reach students that are, like over the summer, I was doing research with a student that was in North Carolina. Couldn't have done that without all of this technology. So I think that the social interaction has been a big part of it. And that also means in the classroom being intentional and deliberate about what the university presidents were saying about the cura personalis, just checking in with students, providing a little bit of extra time, at the beginning of class to ask students what's been going on. Just have some of that personal care, following up on emails. I've had students that have been having a hard time emotionally, psychologically with the pressures of the those that have been going on. Trying to find ways to keep in touch with them and kind of keep giving them encouragement. Those are the things that, it's a little bit less natural to do it when you have to do it digitally, but trying to find ways to do that. That's been kind of the ways that I've been trying to keep the Jesuit in Jesuit education.
Great, thanks. Dr. O'Connor?
I can find my mute button. I'm back. I haven't quite still decided whether I was fortunate to be on sabbatical last spring when we went remote, which I didn't have that issue, but coming into the fall semester, it was like from the frying pan into the fire. So I think one of the biggest challenges is, as Paul said, just trying to make that same connection virtually in the classroom that you did in the classroom. I like to walk around, talk to little groups of people, talk to them before and after class. So it's so much harder to do that virtually. Although you can, I think office hours virtually are a great way to make that connection, because if there's only one person in your office hours at that time, you can actually say, so, you know, how are things going with you? Like, what are you finding difficult? What are you finding easy? And they tend to really want that personal connection. I've had people on office hours for an hour just because there's someone to talk to that's interested in what's going on with them. I think a challenge for the students and for faculty is that it's very distracting being on Zoom, I think. Maybe not for us if we have an empty room here, but students are often in homes where there's other people. I have mothers in the background, cooking. I have other roommates walking in and out of they're talking to somebody. So I think it's really hard to stay focused on Zoom for a lot of students. Maybe Brianna and Allison can adjust that later. And I think for me personally, don't even get me started talking about remote exams. I think those are really, really hard to administer. I find that a real challenge. And just the sheer technology of making sure that the internet's working and that you're not muted. And that's been a little bit of a struggle. I feel like I'm finally above water at this point in the semester because we're about halfway through. But again, like Paul said, I think it's trying to make that connection and try to make it as close to a real classroom experience as we can possibly get for the students.
Great, thanks. Well, great transition to asking Allison and Brianna. Brianna, let's start with you. How are your fellow students feeling this semester? And what are they feeling about next semester? And by fellow students, that means you too.
So as of right now, all the people who I've talked to are all of my fellow students who I've spoken with about this. We're in a better place than we were when we first came back, or even when we first had to make the transition at the end of the spring semester. Because as a lot of people have mentioned, a lot of my fellow panelists have mentioned, it was difficult. It just came out of nowhere. Like, we were told that we were going to leave 3 or 4 days before we had to be gone. So it was like, okay, get your stuff together. People were saying they have to evacuate campus. You have to be off campus by Monday. And we're going to start virtual classes the next Monday after that. So I know it was difficult for our professors who had no idea how to do any of this stuff. They just didn't know how to do this. So it was weird going from on-site, we're going to class every day, to now I have to sit in my room, like Dr. O'Connor said, with my parents doing stuff, my dog's barking, like everything else is going on around, and I'm trying to focus on my history class. So that was just difficult in itself. But now that we are able to be on campus, it is a little bit easier. Like, I'm not at home, I'm in my own room. Yes, I do still have distractions that can get me while I'm in my room, but it's more limited to things that I have going on around me. And then in terms of on a broader scale, it's easier being able to actually go to some classes and have some be on Zoom and still, have the option of how I'm going to do it, even if it is limited to what the teacher wants to do or the professor wants to do. But at the same time, it's a lot better than just having online classes, because I don't feel like that's conducive for a lot of people's learning style. Speaking for myself, I do not learn well online at all. It just doesn't work for me. So it's nice to actually have classes that I can go to, sit in class, pay attention to just the professor, do my work in class, that kind of stuff, and then go back and say, okay, well, I have these online assignments that I have to do. It's the asynchronous class, so I'm not actually meeting on Zoom once a week. They just give me my work and I have to get it done. So it's better than it was. And that's also speaking from the experiences that my fellow students have given me. They also agree that it's a lot better than it was in the spring, just going from being thrown into the water to figure out how we're going to do online classes to now we have a little bit more structure, and hopefully moving into next semester. I don't know that we'll be able to have all on-site classes, but we're all learning together. So as time progresses, we all learn which ways we can do what things. So we're going to have more synchronous classes next semester. Our professors are going to do Zoom class, as opposed to saying, I'm just going to give you your work and you get it done. So it's a learning process, and we all appreciate that we're learning together and can understand that we're learning together.
Great, thank you. Allison.
Yeah, definitely second everything that was already said. Myself and all of my fellow students are very, very grateful for just being able to be on campus. That has been something that has been huge for everyone that I've talked to. Like we've all been like, we'll follow whatever policies you need us to. We just want to be able to stay here. And we want to be able to live here has been a really big thing. As an RA, all of my residents have been talking to me about that. Like I want to be able to stay on campus. I want to live on campus. It's been huge. Not only with the classwork, but also being with like your friends and away from the distractions at home and all of those other things combined. Something that I would like to add is that now that we're so far into it, or it feels like we're so far into it, we're starting to have to come to terms with the fact that this isn't just a 1 year or a few months kind of process. Like this is turning into a new normal for us. And that is a little bit difficult to come to terms with everything that's going on politically and socially, economically, health concerns, all of those things, while trying to be a full-time student. While you're juggling, like all of these people are dying and there are life or death concerns every single day happening. And I have to do this discussion post, like the, what it seems like is the importance is a little bit skewed of what we're asked to do versus like everything that's happening in the outside world, so to speak, outside of our universities even. Along with the classes being like asynchronous specifically, those that were designed to be discussion based, a lot of us feel like we're not learning as much because of what we would have learned from our fellow classmates and our fellow peers from those discussions in class. But what makes that difficult is that the professors also had no time to just redesign an entire course that they've been teaching for a few years and that they knew worked into a virtual format. So I think we're doing well with students giving grace to professors and professors giving grace to us. Just keeping those lines of communication open has been, I think, one of the biggest helps throughout this entire process. Just making sure that we're communicating where we are both at with this and how we can adapt and how we can change for next semester. I know our professors at Rutgers had to decide how they were going to teach next semester super early on in the semester. And I think that's pretty common at universities. So making sure that we're communicating with each other, like this isn't working, this is working really well. I think that's been one of the biggest helps.
Thanks, Allison. Well, I'd like to follow up with my next question and back to the question of racial justice. So if I could ask the university president, starting with Dr. Snyder, what is your university doing to address racism?
We have what we call our anti-racism project. So I wrote a letter to our community called Beyond Words, in which I spoke of the opportunity that we inherited through the tragic death of George Floyd and obviously many others. But this really was a sort of fulcral moment for our nation. It's a turning point. So we have established this anti-racism project, and it has 3 components, along with accompanying conversations. They relate first to hiring. So are we hiring the best person available for each position? So often hiring is discussed in ways associated with opportunity and fairness and equity, each of which is sufficient to hire a wide spectrum of people. What often is forgotten is how our biases, be they conscious, unconscious, be they negative or positive, affect the outcomes of hiring in ways that keep the people who work with us limited to a subset of humanity and not all of humanity, which again is required if we are to be our most creative. So we have some new hiring initiatives in which we are not only training search committees or search committee chairs, but all members of every department who has a hand in the decision associated with a hire. And we're training about how we behave as humans in such situations and how we can get over those cognitive shortcuts, and literally make the best hire, which would imply more inclusive hiring. The second piece is our culture and our climate. So as part of that, we have a DEI scorecard that every unit of the campus at all levels is filling out, so they can examine their processes, examine their practices, which, as you know, are usually where we fall apart, no matter what the law, no matter what the rule, to assure that we are being proactively anti-racist. The third piece is our education, and as part of that, our curriculum. So how authentically do we represent American and world history? How inclusive is our curriculum? And we find, as do so many, that we need to, as we say, decolonize that curriculum. One challenge for any university president is, we know through our shared governance systems, as we call it, the faculty are those primarily in charge of the university curriculum, as it should be, because they are expert. So the question is, how does a university president work with the faculty to effect change to make the curriculum anti-racist? So we are working with our faculty on that, and I'm finding they have been terrific, open-minded, even eager to do our best in adjusting our curriculum, not just to circumstances, but to where it should have been from the start. Amidst this, we are having critically important conversations. So I've received demands from students and from our Black Faculty and Staff Association, and we are working through those. We are working through those in communal ways, and we are responding to the demands point by point. We have websites associated with that. We have hosted virtual forums on topics associated with race, anti-racism, and I think as important as anything, we're having ongoing dialogue with our student leaders, Black student leaders particularly, with our Black Faculty Staff Association. And these have gone from listening sessions to working on concrete problems, so that we are listening in open-minded ways, and hearing the pain and the challenges of our community is as essential as anything that is happening, because if you don't know what's on your palate, if you will, there's no way you can paint a better picture.
Thank you. Father McShane?
Not surprisingly, Fordham is doing many of the same things that LMU is doing. But before I get into that, a couple of things if I might. Number one, let's be honest, slavery is the original sin of American society, and racism is its awful offspring. That I think we have to own up to and own at the outset. And that is a hard thing for American society to do, to recognize that slavery is the original sin of our culture, and that racism is its awful offspring that has tremendous power. Second, one of the things that I've come to understand is that it's easy to name, call out, and condemn obvious, overt, blunt, brutal racism. That's easy. The much more difficult task that we all have to throw ourselves into is the task of dealing with what I refer to as the racism of indifference, where people turn a blind eye, or they can be a little conspiratorial about or just walking by and saying in an exculpatory way, self-absolving way, racism is, I didn't make it. I'm not responsible for it, it's somebody else's. And for as long as that attitude holds sway in the hearts and minds of members of American society or American culture, we're really going to be spinning our wheels. We have to figure out ways to address this Racism of indifference, which, by the way, is the very thing that empowers blunt, brutal, obvious racism and gives it power, because there is almost an understanding, if you don't call something out, you know, you're not responsible, but at the same time, people do understand if you don't call it out, it's going to grow and it's going to get more power. So, you know, against that background, you know, in the aftermath of the brutal killing of George Floyd, you know, as was the case with Tim and just about every college president, university president in the country, I sent out a letter, you know, condemning it and calling the university together to, you know, to address this. But that was not enough. As Tim makes very clear, Dr. Snyder makes clear, words are not enough. Action has to be taken. So we developed pretty quickly an action plan for, and there are two parts to it: confronting racism and educating for justice. Confronting racism and educating for justice, and invited everybody, you know, to throw themselves into this, the implementation of the action plan. The one thing that we're afraid of is that it will become a document that's placed on a shelf somewhere and referred to with great regularity, but no real conviction. So we address many of the things that Dr. Snyder is addressing at LMU, hiring that we see now as hiring for mission, because we're saying that the fight to confront racism and to educate for justice is mission central. You cannot be an institution born of the faith that does justice, which is itself born of the gospel. You cannot be that kind of institution and not throw yourself into this work. So it's mission central for us. So we're looking at hiring practices, training for hiring. We're also requiring everybody in the university to undergo anti-racism, you know, training on an annual basis. And I'm happy to tell you that our Board of Trustees mandated it for itself. And we've had 2 sessions already. We'll have a 3rd session in the next month. All senior leadership in the university has got to do this as well. And we're committed to it, but not a one-shot deal. We believe it has to be annual. It has to be part of the examination of conscience, or the examine of an institution, to look at this in an ongoing way. Second, I want to underscore something that Dr. Snyder said. You know, we're educational institutions. Therefore, the heart of the matter really is in the curriculum. And therefore, what we are doing is we are really making extraordinary efforts to make sure that anti-racism is incorporated into the curriculum, the core curriculum, and then the major curricula as well. So that this becomes a part of the natural educational experience in a Jesuit educational setting, like Fordham or like LMU or like Spring Hill or like Rockhurst or any of them. We have to do this. That requires re-engineering the curriculum. So we want to make sure, for instance, we have orientation, which includes this as a major focus for us. We want to have a first-year course, a first-year experience course, which has this as a driving part of what it is that's studied, what it is that is examined, and the actions that we will commit ourselves to as we come out the other end. We're also looking at the way in which, in the action plan, there are 36 points or actions in the action plan. We're looking at, really changing the culture of the institution to make it more welcoming, more affirming, and more honest in its own appraisal of itself as a culture that is born of the gospel and therefore really wants to live the faith that does justice. So we've incorporated that. The other thing, and I don't know about the rest of the schools, but for us, we're a very interesting operation. We have 2 major campuses in the city of New York, one of which is located in the poorest congressional district in the country, and the other of which is located in one of the top wealthiest zip codes in the country. So we came very quickly to the realization that we can't do anything by ourselves. We have to have meaningful and ongoing relationships with our neighbors. So we're making them partners with us, and we partners with them as we go forward. And we want to also make use of a few things that we have at our disposal. We have a very talented alumni body that boasts a number of really spectacular Black alumni and alumnae who are leaders in their field, and we're bringing them in to talk. We're recording what they're doing. We also have a 50,000 watt radio station, which is an FM station and part of the National Public Radio Network. So we want to use that to create a forum which reaches beyond our boundaries and out into the world. We also are holding our own feet to the fire and saying, you know, the implementation has to go forward. In this moment, we can't blame the pandemic for not doing anything. We have to look on it as Dr. Snyder says, as an opportunity to grow in mission, an opportunity to grow in grace, an opportunity to develop for ourselves and for the world kind of a prophetic outlook on the sin of racism, and do all of this from the heart with such regularity that it becomes a part of the regular rhythm of the institution and the regular, I would say, mission, living out of the mission. Nothing short of that will work. It has to be so interiorized, so adopted by people that this is what we expect of ourselves and what the world expects of us. I want to go back. The racism of indifference is the real problem. When people absolve themselves of any responsibility for racism, I didn't create it, it's somebody else's problem. I think that's a cop-out, to use an expression that we use with fair regularity here in New York. I know the good people of New Orleans and the good people of St. Louis never use expressions like that. It's a cop-out. And I don't want to go there. So those are the things that we're doing. Realizing, of course, that, you know, it's 401 years ago since the first enslaved African was brought to this country against his will, her will. The Emancipation Proclamation, you know, occurred in the 19th century. The Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act occurred during the presidency of Lyndon Johnson. And yet only about 5 months ago, George Floyd was killed.
Yeah.
You know, we have to seize this moment. That's all I'll say. Sorry for going on so long, but Tim, building entirely on what you said.
Well, and I'd like to recommend a video I watched of Fordham's with Rafael Zapata, and is it Anthony Carter, correct? One of your, so everybody Google that one. It's very powerful. And to echo your point, the chief diversity officers of all the Jesuit schools, the U.S. Jesuit schools, and mission officers are meeting regularly. So really and truly, those conversations are happening. To move to Paul and Deb. Deb, what do you think your role as faculty member and advisor is in addressing racial justice on your campus?
Well, actually, piggybacking on what Father McShane said, that racism of indifference, I think it's really important to acknowledge that it's there, it's all around us, and keep the conversation going. Okay? If it's brought up, don't shy away from talking about it. Encourage students to take part in as many activities that are going on campus to address racial injustice, social injustice. But I think you got to keep the conversation going. And I think it was President Snyder said, it's actions more than words. You have to do something. So if you can encourage students or even ourselves to take part in that and keep the conversation and take action, I think it goes a long way.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, well, people may know that Seattle University during the Black Lives Matter protests in the spring was really on the front lines. I mean, we had protests going on 2 blocks from the north end of campus. There was a police precinct that was controversial. It's right, you know, it's right off the end of campus. It's our precinct building. and I had students that were staying in the residence halls, that were having to be evacuated from their rooms because the tear gas was floating into their rooms from the from the streets where the protests were going on. So, it's really for us, it's really not an abstract academic issue, and so. It really had a big impact. So this is going on in spring quarter when all the other, on top of all the measures having to do with COVID were happening. Students were also, um, feeling the psychological pressure of all of this. Many of the students wanting to participate and be active. So I think that, and Seattle University, by the way, has fraction of white students that when I was first at Seattle University, I think it was less than 50% white. Now I think it's a little bit more, but it's kind of in that middle of the range. So we have a large population of students of color. So I think that a lot of our experience with these issues in the immediate sense is again, it's about the cura personalis. It's like, how do I as a Sigma Nu advisor, and how do I as a professor encourage students? How do I support them in their efforts and their desires to act and to work for justice, but also make sure that they're doing things that are safe, doing things that are psychologically healthy, taking care of that. Allison, I liked what you said about this whole environment sort of having an impact on our motivation, and considering is this discussion that I'm participating in online, is it really important right now with this stuff that's going on? Seattle University actually, the provost Shane Martin imposed requirements at the end of spring quarter, sort of mandatory optional requirements, saying that final exams, professors had to make final exams, final projects optional at the end of the quarter, and final exams, they had to figure out a way to excuse students from final exams if students were, facing these issues. So, so I think in the immediate sense, our fight is really a direct and personal one. So we're engaged in these issues just by kind of being in the trenches. The Starbucks that I typically go to across from my office was firebombed. They had the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or they later called it the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. That was in a park right off campus, the same place with the. And so I had students. My Alpha Sigma Nu officers were telling me, were reporting to me, they had gone and checked it out, see how things were going in there, and they were hanging out there. So it's like, okay, well, I'm glad you're kind of checking things out. I'm glad things are going well, but be careful. And so, so I have a great executive team this year, and so they were eager to do something in the midst of all that. What they were able to do in the spring, they actually got started, ahead of time before they were actually not on task until this fall. But in the spring, they decided to put a resource page together, and they distributed it to Alpha Sigma Nu memberships, ways that people could get active and be involved and try to do something that would make a difference. I would say that now the protests are settled down. We're kind of trying to figure out what this means going forward, and I agree with Dr. Snyder that it's a big question about, well, how do we take advantage of this opportunity? We seem to be at this kind of really historical moment. What's Alpha Sigma Nu's role in the university? What's my role as a faculty member in the university in making that go forward? And we're learning, a lot of us are kind of new to taking an active role in some of this. But Alpha Sigma Nu at Seattle University has always had a kind of a role of providing interface between the administration and the students. So I foresee our job this year, in part at least, being facilitating the kind of dialogue, the kind of conversations, so that administrators can hear what the student experience is for students of color and white students. and likewise, can kind of see if there's anything that they can do to support the administration in their efforts to try to combat racism and be anti-racist. See if there are events that the university would like to see mounted, or other ways that Alpha Sigma Nu can reach out. So we're learning, we're exploring that. I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like, but I'm sure that that we're going to play a role in that. There's certainly a strong interest in among the students, for sure, in that combating racism, being actively anti-racist, as Father McShane was saying. But we're it's a new thing. We're not sure what form that's going to take.
And complicated by virtual.
Right.
Kate,
Yeah.
would I be allowed to add one additional thought to this?
Sure.
We speak about the opportunity, and toward the beginning, I spoke to some of the racism challenges in the nation, and then also the political divide. And I think it's really unfortunate, and we need to keep in mind that the two have interacted. So I get a lot of messages from various members of the community, and they're all about politics. So when you have a protest, the protesters are liberal, and then everybody against the protesters are conservative. So we all take sides over race based on politics. There is no politics in this at all. This is about Catholic social teaching. It's about the dignity of every person born. None of us selects the casing we're in. We don't select our hair color, our eye color, the time we're born, where we're born, how many siblings we have, the economic conditions into which we're born. None of us. So come on, people. So we have to keep making sure when we communicate that we pull people away from that, because the rest of society is pouring that into everything we do.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Tim, and I just say we can't choose where we're born, but we can choose how we react to it and what we do with it. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is why this is a defining moment for us. It is an inflection moment. It's a moment that really requires discernment to find where the Spirit of God is leading us. And I hope, and I know, in the case of Jesuit institutions, the Spirit of God is leading us into this important moment. And by the way, here in New York, it's wearing a mask or not is political too. I mean, really? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Brianna, I'd like to kind of follow up on comments that Paul made about student organizations and ask you to comment on what role you think as the president of your two organizations and what your organizations can, what role they can play in achieving racial justice at Spring Hill.
Yes. So I actually believe that student organizations play a lot bigger of a role than some may like to believe, because everybody just likes to say, hey, this is my organization, this is what we're here for. Like, we're the Green Keepers Club, and so all we're really interested in is environmental issues. But I don't feel like that's the case. If there's something going on in your community, you need to, play a part in taking care of that. And so that's not to say like every organization needs to do a diversity and inclusion program once a week. Like that's not like, you know what I'm saying? I can't think of the word, but it's not like nobody really expects anybody to do that. So it's not feasible. And I just feel like in that case, when organizations that are dedicated to these causes, you need to support them. Other organizations need to support them. The student body as a whole needs to support them. Now that also brings in like the leadership of these organizations and the challenge for us to engage people who don't want to be engaged. So that's a problem that we have a lot. Like, I'm part of the diversity and inclusion action team here as well. And Delta Sigma Theta sorority is also engaged in furthering the Black community. And so we always have a problem with how do we get the people who we really need to get to engage in these things that, we're having. So we have discussions about educational equity and racial equity and the difference between equity and equality. But the people who actually need to hear these conversations don't come to them. So how do we get them to come? So the way that we kind of tried to solve this problem, if you will, is by getting buy-in from the other Greek organizations on campus. So if the president says, hey, I'll go, maybe they'll get their other brothers or sisters to come as well. Or if we go and talk to the person who's over Greek organizations and say, hey, we really like it for you to make this this event mandatory for at least 2 representatives from these organizations to come, then that's how we get, you know, and sometimes it works, you know, if you force people to come to stuff, they're not always going to get what you really want them to get out of it. But, you know, there are always the people who are kind of still listening. So, yeah, I feel like I kind of went off with the question. But
no. Really what you're saying is you see one spot that you can make an impact is if you get the leaders of student organizations together.
exactly.
Yeah. Right. Allison?
Yeah, everything that was just said is so important. One of the first things with this question that my immediately thought of is the importance of including intersectionality in every single organization on campus. So like Brianna just said, with an environmental organization, like, okay, well, environmental racism exists too. And what about, like, you have an LGBTQ organization, what about the people of color who also identify as LGBTQ? As universities, we seem to create organizations where people can find a sense of belonging with one of their identities, but if they have multiple identities that are oppressed or minority identities, like where do those students go? And we need to do a better job of that, I think, across the board in general, of making sure that all of those spaces are welcoming and intersectional in every way, and remembering that at all times. And also remembering, like, Father McShane was mentioning, as far as like our roots in slavery, we also have roots in colonialism, that in white colonialism then has a history of trying to colonize different movements, like feminism, for example, with white feminism, and all of those movements, whatever the most agent identity is within a like oppressed group, that tends to be the identity that then gets the most attention within that group. So we need to just remember all of the intersections of all of those things. So I completely agree, all student organizations should be involved in this work. I also think student leaders have a particular responsibility, because we're both peers and leaders at the same time. We're a part of conversations with our peers, but we also have the ears of faculty and staff members that other students might not. So we have a responsibility to advocate for those students that we're listening to. For example, in residence life, our campus climate survey that we did a few years ago at Rockhurst showed that most of our microaggressions happened in our residential spaces. That means RAs have a huge responsibility to try to engage with that and stop that and do what we can on that ground level that administration might not be able to do. I think another thing to keep in mind is that student organizations have a huge opportunity, because the organization part already happened. The organization already exists. So we have people who are motivated. We have people who are passionate. We just have to do our best as student leaders within those organizations to mobilize and take advantage of those people who are already engaged. But like Brianna said, there is the issue of the people who don't want to be engaged in those conversations. And that's compounded on the fact that right now, with everything going on, I've had a few conversations with our faculty advisor for Voices for Justice about how do we engage people to advocate for issues that they don't personally come in contact with. Because of where we're at in our society right now, it's hard for people to have the emotional capacity to care about things outside of their current scope, and what they're interacting with every day, because what everyone is interacting with every day is I mean, crazy compared to where we were at just a few months ago. So trying to figure out how to engage those people that might not have a huge capacity within their own life to be engaged in things that don't directly impact them. And that's a really big challenge that I think we're all still trying to get a handle on. I don't really have an answer to it, but it's something I think that we need to keep in mind when we're trying to engage those people. And also remembering that as university students, we're a part of our wider city, we're a part of our wider community, and getting involved in those things as well. As much as it's important to create change within our university, I think we also need to get involved outside of our university. I think there's also, university is like a good practice ground for creating like policy change and things like that on a macro level, because at least for Rockhurst, like we're a pretty small university. So if you can figure out how to do it here, well, maybe you can do it in the wider community, and you can figure out how those levels of advocacy work and what you need to do as an individual and how you need to organize to actually create policy and systemic change, because that's where we need to go.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Allison. Well, we've come up a couple minutes past our hour, and I know all of you are on a schedule. And so I'd hate to make you late for anything else. But I really want to thank you so very much, Father McShane, Dr. Snyder, Dr. O'Connor, Dr. Fontana, Allison, Brianna. What a wonderful discussion. I think, you know, sometimes when you hop on a webinar and see a title, maybe the conversation doesn't live up to a title. I think this time you all absolutely addressed just what we were hoping you would with the notion of this pivot that we are all experiencing. So thank you so very much, and thanks for all your support for Alpha Sigma Nu. I also want to make a pitch for paying attention to look for our magazine. It's the focus of our magazine is on Ignatian spirituality, and there's a directly addressing the topic of racial justice is a wonderful article by Mary Wardell, the Chief Diversity Officer of University of San Francisco. So keep your eye out for our magazine. Thank you again, panelists, and we look forward to our next webinar. Again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
your
Kate.
leadership.
Oh, thanks for your time.